Hello, and you're listening to the Zone of Hot Truth, a podcast where we talk about our I already fucked this up. Experiences, opinions, and hot takes as new DMs in supposedly 15 minutes. I'm Kevin.
I'm Eric, and every time I drink hot tea, I wish I chose something else.
It begins. Yeah, great.
I'm John, and Earl Grey with a splash of cream, 2 sugars, is the best drink that's ever been made by a human.
I'm Grant. You guys are barbarians. Tea and coffee should be drank without any cream.
All right, and with that, so what we're going to be discussing today is rolling in order and its variants. And so if you're unfamiliar with that, that is basically where during character creation, the players, when they are generating stats, they don't necessarily choose where they go. So they'll start with strength, for example. They'll roll the dice, they'll get a number, that'll be their strength score. They go to dex, roll the dice, get a number, and so on and so forth until they have a full set of ability scores. And this is a fairly controversial topic, so we'll see what kind of interesting things we get into. So I think what we're going to start with, though, are what the goals of this system are. So, Eric, why don't you go ahead and give us what do you think is one thing that this system or these systems are trying to accomplish? Start us off.
I think rolling your stats in order, one of the main things it is designed to encourage is to de-incentivize prior character creation. It's nearly impossible to figure out ahead of time what your character is when you don't know any of their stats.
That is true. What is it? There was a... Here we go. We're just going to keep doing this. We're going to keep pointing. Anyway, I guess I'll start. So, like, what I'll say, I think, regarding that is I've tried to, or I've made multiple characters of, like, okay, if I have this has a high score, this has a high score, this has a high score, it is tedious to do, so definitely.
Yeah, so maybe not impossible, just harder.
Incentivize. Anything else you want to say about that? Okay.
No, I personally, I don't have anything else to add to that comment.
No.
Okay. So, John, so what do you think is one thing that the system is trying to accomplish?
So the thing that I think the system is trying to accomplish and is actually pretty interesting is the fact that, like, actual humans aren't min-maxed. Like, you don't come out with a 20 in charisma. Like, some people are strong and some people are smart, and you're not always min-maxed into that. So just because I am smart does not mean also that I'm inversely dumb. I can be both. So I think it incentivizes and kind of forces more organic characters.
I think that's an excellent point.
True.
It's definitely very boring when every wizard has 8 in strength.
Because that is the optimal thing to do.
And it could encourage people to kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit as well. Just, well, I have a lot of extra strength. I didn't dump it, so maybe I'll take some melee-oriented spells. Maybe try to use that.
No, I think that's a good example.
I'll try and make that melee wizard work.
We've all heard
When
of what
else
is it?
will I do it?
What is the character? The stereotypic muscle wizard. That's what it is. Yeah.
Muscle wizard. Fist.
You can't see this, but Eric is gesturing at his massive bicep right now. But it's absolutely massive.
Show.
Yeah.
The gun sure doesn't play on audio.
Unfortunately not. Kevin, what do you think?
What do I think about that? So I think
What is incentivize?
I don't know. I'll think about it, because I think in regards to this system, I think it is specifically also designed there for new groups as well. Like it excels at reducing the decision space quite considerably, in the sense that, okay, well, here are all the races and all of the classes I could choose from. Now what do I do, right? So now if I know my character is good in strength or dex or whatever, right? Though they have like a more limited subset, though they could choose opposite of that if they wanted to. So they still have that option on the table. And I think that's important, especially if you want to get playing in the same session to get the feel for the character.
Grant, you seem frustrated that Kevin stole your idea.
Yes, because I honestly don't have another good thing that I like about that system that hasn't already been said.
You did mention the comfort zone, I think, as a key thing, and I think that's a good point. That what we really didn't, but you did.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe make that sub point my main point. It it is a way it is a way to force experimentation, and get players to either force their character to work with lesser stats than they would like, which could lead to some interesting situations, or do a complete 180 and just make a brand new character that they would have never considered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've all touched upon that as a particular thing about, okay, you can potentially end up in a thing where like everybody wants to play a certain way, and this gives you an opportunity to kind of shuffle that around. And I think you might end up with like a little bit of backlash at first, but I think like I find that as people begin to play with that character, they feel better about it. Is I think something that comes out of that, or they see ways how this character can be interesting.
Yeah, like so that, and you hit the nail on the head of every player that I have found has said, I have bad stats. You get 2 sessions into a game with a character concept that you like, and you're rolling with it. You like what it's doing. You're enjoying the character. The joy comes from the play and not the numbers being perfect.
Yeah.
I'll take that a step further and say, I think a lot of the backlash that I've had when I've had fixed stats has gone away once they're 2 sessions at most in, and they've played this character and they recognize this character is now theirs, and all the transgression that has occurred of having their stats be in a very particular way ahead of time is completely forgotten.
And yeah, 5% doesn't really make that big of a difference after a few weeks of playing. It's something you forget about.
Yeah. I think we could keep listing different things about what the system is kind of working towards. So why don't we also talk about what are some of the pitfalls, since I think there are a number of those that come with this system. Eric, why don't you go ahead and start us off with one?
So the main one that I found, and I'm going to speak specifically to 5th edition because I think it's the most salient there, is the classes that require, or at least need, more stats. Monk and Paladin are 2 that come to mind immediately, of needing 3 core stats. It's a lot harder to play those classes, or at least feel like those classes are worthwhile, when you got to hit jackpot on, for Paladin, Charisma, Strength or Dex, and Con. And the lower, and because of the fact that it's a lot more random, having one of those 3 real low really hurts that core class. Whereas compared to, say, a sorcerer, you just need high charisma. Everything else is gravy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's only a few, but there are a few classes that specifically need a certain combination of high stats, and it is hard to get that when it's completely random.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that in terms of like the mad characters and ability score dependent characters having kind of a much harder time, so you might end up with fewer of them probably in the main party, especially Paladin. I think Paladin is probably one of the more interesting role-playing ones you could lose kind of as a part of that. John?
So I guess like the good thing or the bad thing that I have a couple bad things I can say about it, but rolling a low number on that 3rd dice is really bad. Getting a low con stat, like getting a -1 to con or lower, that's real bad. That's like dead on arrival character type stuff. And I think you can get more dead on arrival characters like wizards with 4 HP at level 1, and that's not great. Maybe that's a place where a DM can step in and say, all right, go ahead and roll. But that feels like hand-waving away the point of the system. And my second point is that I think it pigeonholes a certain class too much. So if you roll high strength and con, okay, you're playing a barbarian, maybe a fighter. That's like very narrow possibility space. So it narrows down that possibility space, and that is a negative thing for some players. Like if you put a gun to my head and say, figure out what to do with high charisma and wisdom and garbage everything else, I'll make a character. I don't think it'll be great, but there's just some combinations like that are just going to be suboptimal and a struggle to put something together with.
I think with those 2 points, we often find that these systems have some sort of safety net in place. That often there is, well, if this stat is kind of shaky, you can either switch it out with something else, swap them around, or you pick one stat to like be like a 14 or something, depending upon the system. And that might help curtail that, I think, to some degree, while still providing the benefits of that system. But I agree that is definitely something that it sucks when you end up rolling that stuff.
It is a negative feeling as a player.
Yeah.
And every time you add a rule like, oh, you can have at least 114, maybe you can swap 2 stats, you start to get further away from the point of randomly assigning the stats. And at that point, why don't you just let your players pick it? Because if you guarantee a 14, a +2 racial, suddenly you have a 16 and whatever you want. That's pretty much what the standard array can give you. And again, at that point, you've defeated the purpose.
I would argue that that is kind of shifting too far in the other end of the spectrum, because I think you still have most of the randomness in place, like with this. It'll be inherently more interesting than just going straight to the array. Because you still, even if you remove shuffle around a couple stats, you ensure that they're good at something, you still end up with a character that is different in the end. And probably something they might have not played before.
Yeah, that's actually valid, or a very good counterpoint.
So, Grant, why don't you go ahead and tell us? So you mentioned like one thing I think that was particularly potent for you. Is there anything else that you think that you can come up with that is a pitfall?
My biggest pitfall I see with the random pre-assigned stats is that it kind of takes away from the player's freedom to make something they find interesting. Because just because the DM thinks it might be interesting for a character to be generated that way and have a lot of randomness to it doesn't mean that that's the type of thing the player will be interested in and want to explore. And you could end up driving away a certain number or a certain subset of players from your games and make it harder to get a game to take off and get off the ground.
But isn't that like the standard? Some games aren't for everybody. This game isn't for me, and that's okay. We shrug and move on to the next one.
Yeah, and you're right. That's the whole point of having like a session 0 or a session before the actual first session, is so you can air some of this out. But I'd be willing to guess this is something that a lot of players generally might not like. I don't know, but from my experience, I've heard of and seen a lot of people who like being able to put their stats where they want.
Okay.
And I fall into that category, so I am biased.
I'm sorry.
That I was not directed at that, but that is just to let us know that we have about a minute left. So I think we're just going to go right into final thoughts. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and start us off with what you have, and we'll just go around the horn and finish this up.
Sure. I see this as a big threshold to cross at my table. If I'm going to bring this up, it's something I'm going to discuss at character creation, the concept, and I feel that in my experience, players who are less likely to be flexible in this are more likely to be characters who are going to have difficulties in participating in the cooperative character creation process, which is a huge red flag for me as a DM. So I see it as a very important tool to say, okay, these are people who are likely to be happy playing in a game, and these are players who I am less likely to be happy in my game.
John?
I think that it is an interesting concept that I don't think I would ever have at my table. I think as a player, it feels too limiting, and D&D is a game about feeling like a fucking superhero, and I think there's too high of a chance for this to mess that up, to force you into something that you don't like, or force you into something that is not viable.
Grant?
Yeah, I believe most players value the freedom to kind of place their stats how they wish and are capable of making interesting characters on their own, rather than kind of the stats being predetermined in a fixed manner as the end-all be-all way to make something interesting.
Okay. And I think the last thing that I will leave us with is, I think that regardless of what happens, I think providing yourself with some sort of flexibility in terms of like what the DM is providing is, I think, something that's important. Because at the end of the day, I think you're playing with friends, and you will find ways to shore up the weaknesses of your character. This is one of those few games where you can go from 0 to hero, and you actually do that. So give it a shot, is what I'll say to those out there. Okay, so I think that will be the last of what we have here, so keep rolling those dice.